Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I was offered $100,000 to join a Squid Game competition I found on the dark web. The first elimination was real. Okay, I don't even know how to start this. I'm not exactly the adventurous type. I'm just your average guy, 21 years old, juggling community college classes and a part-time gig at Starbucks. Most of my life revolves around serving overly complicated orders. Seriously, how does someone drink a venti, half-sweet, oat milk, double-shot mocha, and scrolling through TikTok until I pass out at 2 a.m.? But this story isn't something you'd believe if you heard it in passing. Honestly, I wouldn't believe it myself if it didn't happen to me. It all started one night when I was watching random YouTube videos about the dark web. You've probably seen them, those animated horror stories or Reddit compilations where people claim they found hitmen or cursed artifacts online. It's the kind of content you watch just to feel a little spooked before bed, you know? Anyway, I got sucked into the rabbit hole, and while reading the comments, I noticed someone mention a site called The Playground. They didn't give much detail, just something like, if you think these stories are scary, check out The Playground on the dark web. But don't say I didn't warn you. Naturally, my dumb curiosity kicked in. I didn't really believe in the dark web. Like, yeah, I've heard about it. Those shady corners of the internet where you can buy fake IDs, drugs, and all that illegal stuff. But it always sounded like something you'd hear about in a bad Netflix thriller. Still, I wanted to see if it was real. What's the worst that could happen, right? So, I downloaded Tor, the browser you need to access the dark web, and started poking around. Let me tell you, it's not as glamorous or high-tech as people make it sound. Most of it looks like a relic from the early 2000s, plain black backgrounds, neon green text, and links that take forever to load. But then I found it, The Playground. It was this weird forum with categories like experiences, requests, and games. Most of the posts were garbage, people advertising illegal stuff or asking for money. But then there was this one post that caught my eye. The title said, "Looking for players, $100,000 grand prize." It felt like someone had slapped me in the face. 100 grand. That's like 3 years worth of rent and all the avocado toast I could ever want. The post was super short, almost sketchy in how vague it was. Do you think you have what it takes to win $100,000? We're looking for people willing to compete in a series of challenges. Must be over 18. Physical and mental strength required. DM for details. Serious inquiries only. At first, I thought it was some kind of scam, like one of those fake Instagram giveaways where they ask for your banking info. But then I thought about those escape room competitions you see on TikTok, or those scavenger hunts rich YouTubers organize for clout. Maybe it was something like that. And if it was a scam, I'd just ghost them before giving away any personal info. No harm, no foul. So, I did something stupid. I sent them a message. Their reply came faster than I expected. I mean, I had barely closed the laptop when my Tor messenger pinged with a new message. It was from the same random string of letters and numbers as the username, which already gave me a bad vibe. The message was simple, but cold, almost clinical. Welcome, player. If you wish to proceed, download the attached file and follow the instructions. You will have 24 hours to respond. There was a PDF attached to the message. Against my better judgment, I downloaded it. Honestly, I was half expecting my laptop to explode into a ball of malware. But nope, it opened up just fine. The document was titled Player Agreement, and let me tell you, it looked legit. Like someone had gone out of their way to make this look professional, almost corporate. The font was clean. There were bullet points, legal jargon, and even a section for a digital signature at the end. But as I read through it, my stomach started to twist into knots. Here's what stuck out. Players must commit fully to the game. Withdrawal after the first round is not permitted. Participants will be monitored at all times to ensure compliance. The organizers are not liable for injury, trauma, or death resulting from gameplay. I read that last part twice. Injury? Death? I felt my hands starting to sweat, and for a second, I thought about closing my laptop and pretending none of this had happened. But then, I remembered the $100,000. They weren't asking for my bank info or anything shady up front. So maybe this was just part of the game. Like, to make it feel more intense. I'd watched enough reality shows to know they love hyping up the drama, right? I kept scrolling through the document, and at the bottom, there were 3 more rules in bold red text. They felt more like warnings than anything else. Do not attempt to contact law enforcement or outside parties about this competition. Doing so will result in immediate disqualification. Players who fail to meet the requirements of a round will be eliminated. Elimination is permanent. That last one hit different. It didn't say disqualified or removed. It said permanent. And the way they phrased it, it was chilling, like there was no way back once you were out. I sat there for a good 20 minutes, just staring at my screen. My brain was screaming, this is a bad idea. But something about it pulled me in. Maybe it was the money, or maybe it was just my stupid curiosity again, but I filled out the form. They only asked for basic stuff. My name, age, height, weight, and a headshot. Nothing that felt too invasive. The second I clicked submit, the screen went black for a moment. Then another message popped up. Thank you for joining. Instructions will follow. Be ready. The instructions came the next day. A date, time, and location. No other details. Just an address. A dingy warehouse on the edge of town, in one of those run-down industrial areas that always feel like they belong in a horror movie. The kind of place you'd only go to if you were desperate or looking to die. But I showed up anyway. The night of, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a huge mistake. The warehouse was every bit as sketchy as I'd imagined. Graffiti on the walls, shattered windows, the faint smell of rust and oil in the air. When I pulled up in my crappy old Civic, I saw a few other cars parked nearby, all of them nicer than mine. BMWs, Audis. These weren't the kind of people I expected to see in a place like this. Outside the building, there were about 12 of us. No one said anything at first. We all just stood there, shuffling awkwardly, stealing glances at each other. There was this one girl, probably around my age, wearing a black hoodie with the hood up. She was standing near this tall, wiry guy in a leather jacket, whispering something I couldn't hear. A middle-aged man with a receding hairline kept glancing at his watch, like he was late for something. We all looked normal. Too normal. It was unsettling. At exactly 8 p.m., the warehouse door creaked open, and this guy stepped out. He was dressed in black from head to toe. Hoodie, jeans, boots, even gloves. But the weirdest part? He was wearing a featureless white mask, the kind you'd find in a dollar store during Halloween. "Follow me," he said, his voice muffled but firm. No introduction, no explanation. He just turned and walked inside, leaving the door open. Some people hesitated, but eventually we all followed. Inside, the place was dimly lit by these harsh, flickering fluorescent lights. The air was cold, and the sound of our footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. The guy in the mask led us down a narrow hallway and into this massive open room. In the center was a long metal table with 12 black duffel bags laid out in a neat row. "Choose a bag," the man said, his tone leaving no room for questions. I walked up and grabbed one. It was heavier than I expected, and when I opened it, I felt my stomach drop. Inside was a plain white jumpsuit, a black armband with a number stitched on it. Mine was number 7. And, get this, a knife. Not some little pocket knife, but a full-on military-grade blade. I looked around and saw the same expressions of confusion and fear on everyone else's faces. The wiry guy with the leather jacket actually laughed, like he thought this was some kind of joke. But the guy in the mask wasn't laughing. "Put on the jumpsuits," he said. "Leave your phones and personal belongings in the bag." At this point, I should have walked out. I should have. But there was something about the way he said it, this quiet menace in his voice, that made me freeze. So, like an idiot, I did what he said. We all did. Once we were suited up, the man handed out envelopes. Inside mine was a single piece of paper with a list of instructions. Follow the rules. Complete the tasks. Do not hesitate. At the bottom, in bold red letters, was one final line. Failure will result in elimination. The second the lights went out, the room plunged into this suffocating darkness. You know the kind of dark where you can't even see your own hands in front of your face. That's what it was like. No one spoke. All you could hear was this weird, low hum coming from somewhere deep in the warehouse, like an old generator struggling to stay alive. And then, click, a single spotlight flicked on, aimed straight at the center of the room. The guy in the white mask was back, standing under the light like some twisted game show host. Except now, he wasn't alone. There were 2 more people with him, also dressed in black, wearing masks. Their masks were different though. One had a red X, and the other had a red circle. Both of them were holding batons. Not the fake, foam kind they use in LARPing or cosplay. The real kind, the ones that could break bones. "Welcome to round 1, the guy in the white mask announced, his voice cutting through the silence. "In this game, there are no second chances. Remember, elimination is permanent." I felt my stomach flip. This wasn't a scavenger hunt or some elaborate escape room. Whatever this was, it was real. Too real. The masked man motioned to the table where the duffel bags had been. The bags were gone now, replaced with a set of rusty metal chairs arranged in a perfect circle. In the center of the circle was a large hourglass, the kind you'd see in an antique shop, with bright red sand trickling down inside it. "You will each take a seat," he continued. "When the game begins, you will have 60 seconds to decide. The person who receives the most votes will be eliminated." Votes? What the hell was he talking about? People started whispering. shuffling nervously toward the chairs. I was frozen for a second, but when the guy in the X mask banged his baton against the floor, I snapped out of it and hurried to sit down. We all did. There were 12 of us, one for each chair. The jumpsuits made us look like prisoners, with those black armbands marking us like cattle. I caught the eye of the hoodie girl from earlier. She was sitting across from me, biting her lip, her leg bouncing like crazy. The wiry guy in the leather jacket was smirking, leaning back in his chair like he didn't have a care in the world. Meanwhile, the older guy with the receding hairline was sweating bullets, wiping his forehead with the sleeve of his jumpsuit. "Here are the rules," the white mask guy said, pacing around the circle. "You will write down the number of the person you want to eliminate on the card in front of you. Do not discuss your choice. Do not attempt to influence others. When the hourglass runs out, the votes will be tallied. The person with the most votes will be removed." "Removed?" The older guy shot up from his chair, his voice cracked, his hands shaking. "What do you mean by—" Before he could finish, the X-mask guy lunged at him, swinging the baton. It connected with this sickening crack against his ribs, and the man crumpled to the floor, gasping like a fish out of water. No one else moved. We were too scared. "Sit down," the white mask guy said, his voice calm, almost bored. "Next time, it'll be your skull." The older guy crawled back into his chair, wheezing, clutching his side. The spotlight shifted to the hourglass, and the red sand began to fall. "Your time starts now." The room went dead silent, except for the faint hiss of the sand. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I looked around the circle, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to figure out who I could trust, but everyone was avoiding eye contact. I glanced down at the card and pencil in front of me. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely pick them up. 60 seconds. That's all we had, but it felt like an eternity. My brain was racing. Who do I vote for? Do I go for someone strong, like the wiry guy in the leather jacket? Someone who might be a threat later on? Or do I go for the older guy, the one who was already injured, already weak? I didn't want to vote at all. This was insane. But then I thought about what might happen if I didn't. What if they found out? What if I ended up with the most votes? The sand kept falling. 30 seconds. I felt the hoodie girl's eyes on me for a split second before she darted her gaze away. The guy next to me, some clean-cut dude who looked like he'd just walked out of a CrossFit gym, was gripping his pencil so hard I thought it might snap. Across the circle, the wiry guy was still smirking, but now his leg was bouncing like he was nervous. 15 seconds. My palms were slick with sweat. My mind was screaming at me to make a decision, but I couldn't. Every option felt wrong. Every option felt like a death sentence. 10 seconds. I stared at the card. My hand moved on its own, scribbling down a number. 3. The older guy. I didn't even think about it. I just did it. The sand ran out. "Time's up," the white mask guy announced. "Place your cards in the center." One by one, we all stood up and dropped our cards in a small metal box sitting next to the hourglass. No one spoke. No one looked at each other. The tension in the room was suffocating. When the last card was in, the white mask guy picked up the box and started flipping through the cards. He didn't say anything, just nodded slightly as he tallied the votes. Finally, he looked up and said one word. 3. The older guy froze. His eyes went wide, and he shook his head, his lips trembling. No, please. This has to be a mistake. Please. Before he could finish, the X-mask and circle mask guys grabbed him. He screamed, thrashing, trying to fight them off, but it was no use. They dragged him out of his chair and toward a door at the far end of the room. The rest of us just sat there, paralyzed. No one dared to move. As they shoved him through the door, his screams got louder. And then, bang! The sound of a gunshot echoed through the warehouse. We all jumped. The screams stopped. The X-mask guy walked back into the room, his baton now streaked with red. He didn't say a word as he took his place behind the white mask guy. "Congratulations," the white mask guy said. "You've survived round 1. Get ready for round 2. The lights flickered, and then everything went black again. When the lights came back on, the older guy, the one we all voted for, was gone. His chair sat empty, and the blood-streaked baton still rested in the X-mask guy's hand, like it was nothing more than a casual accessory. The rest of us just sat there, frozen in place, trying to process what had just happened. That gunshot, his screams, it wasn't just for show. He was gone. This wasn't a game anymore. This was a slaughterhouse, and we were the livestock. "Stand up," the white mask guy ordered, snapping us out of the collective haze of shock. His voice didn't even have a hint of remorse in it. It was monotone, detached, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. "It's time for round 2. No one moved at first. Honestly, we were too scared to. The girl in the hoodie, the one I kept noticing, slowly pushed herself out of her chair, her hands trembling at her sides. That seemed to set off a chain reaction, and one by one, we all got up. No one dared to look at the empty chair. "Follow me," the white mask guy said, motioning toward another door on the opposite side of the warehouse. It was a heavy steel thing, with peeling gray paint and scratches all over it, like someone or something had been clawing at it. He opened it with a metallic groan, revealing a long dark hallway beyond. The air smelled worse here, like damp concrete and something metallic. Blood? Rust? I couldn't tell, but it made me want to gag. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, lit only by a few flickering bulbs dangling from the ceiling. The sound of our footsteps echoed unnervingly, like the warehouse itself was alive and breathing around us. No one said a word. Even the wiry guy with the smirk from earlier wasn't smirking anymore. His face was pale, his eyes darting around like he was expecting something to jump out at him. We finally reached another door, this one marked with a crude red X painted across it. The white mask guy turned to us, his head tilting slightly, almost like he was studying us. "This round is called the maze," he said. "Inside, you will find a series of corridors and rooms. Your objective is simple. Find the exit." His tone shifted then, colder, sharper. "But there's a catch. Some of the corridors are rigged with traps. Some of the rooms will not lead to the exit, and some of you will not make it out." I felt the blood drain from my face. Traps? What kind of traps? Before I could even process it, he continued, holding up a small electronic device. It looked like a remote control, with a blinking red light on it. "Each of you has a tracker embedded in your jumpsuit," he explained. "This allows us to monitor your progress. It also allows us to encourage those who hesitate. If you stop moving for too long, the tracker will deliver a shock, a strong one." I didn't like how he emphasized the word strong. My mind flashed to the older guy from before, the way he'd begged, the way they dragged him away. The people running this thing didn't care about us. We were toys to them, disposable entertainment. You will have 20 minutes to complete the maze, he finished. Fail, and you will be eliminated. He stepped aside, and the X-mask guy opened the door. What was waiting on the other side wasn't what I expected. I thought it'd be some kind of basic hallway with a few twists and turns, but no. This thing was massive. The walls were tall, at least 10 feet high, made of concrete, with metal grates bolted into random spots. Some parts of the maze were pitch black. Others had dim red emergency lights, casting eerie shadows. I couldn't see much beyond the first few turns, but I could hear the faint sound of something mechanical whirring in the distance. Your time starts now, the white mask guy said, and the X-mask guy shoved the person closest to the door, a girl with blonde hair, inside. She stumbled, let out a panicked scream, and ran. One by one, they pushed the rest of us in. When it was my turn, the X-mask guy grabbed my shoulder, his grip like a vice, and shoved me forward. I stumbled into the maze, my heart hammering in my chest. The door slammed shut behind us, and suddenly, I was on my own. The maze was worse than I could have imagined. The walls weren't just tall, they were narrow. Some corridors were barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, and the air felt heavy, oppressive. The mechanical sounds I'd heard earlier were louder now, almost rhythmic, like giant gears grinding against each other. Every step I took echoed unnervingly, and the shadows cast by the red lights made it hard to tell where I was going. I turned a corner and almost immediately regretted it. The corridor ahead was lined with spikes, actual sharp metal spikes jutting out of the walls. They weren't stationary either. They were moving, retracting, and extending like some kind of twisted carnival ride. I stopped dead in my tracks, trying to figure out how I was supposed to get past them. BZT. A sharp, agonizing jolt shot through my body, and I collapsed to my knees. The tracker. I'd stopped moving for too long. My heart felt like it was about to explode, and my muscles were twitching from the shock. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself to stand and staggered forward. The spikes weren't just random, they were timed. I stood there, watching their pattern, my breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. When I saw an opening, I sprinted through, the spikes brushing against my arms as they slammed shut behind me. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My legs felt like jelly, but I kept moving, turning corner after corner, desperately searching for any sign of an exit. I wasn't alone in there. I could hear the others, distant screams, the sound of footsteps pounding against the concrete, the occasional BZT of someone else getting shocked. At one point, I heard a blood-curdling scream followed by a heavy, wet thud. I didn't stop to look. I couldn't. The deeper I went, the worse it got. I passed rooms with hanging chains, blades swinging from the ceiling, pits that looked bottomless. In one room, I saw a guy, one of the others from the group, lying face down in a pool of blood, his jumpsuit torn open across the back. I didn't recognize him at first, but then I saw the black armband with his number on it. Number 5. I kept running. Eventually, I found myself in a long, dimly lit hallway. At the end of it, there was a door with a green exit sign glowing faintly above it. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. I sprinted toward it, my feet barely touching the ground, but as I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The door wasn't open. It was chained shut. Before I could even think about what to do, I heard something behind me. Heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate. I turned around and saw one of the masked men, the one with the red circle, standing at the other end of the hallway. He wasn't holding a baton this time. He was holding an axe, and he was walking straight toward me. I froze. My brain refused to process what was happening. The guy with the red circle mask stood there at the other end of the hallway, the axe hanging loosely in his hand like it was an extension of his body. He didn't run, didn't charge. He just walked toward me at a slow, deliberate pace. That was somehow worse. It wasn't frantic or chaotic. It was methodical, controlled, like he knew exactly how this was going to end. The exit sign above the door mocked me, glowing faintly in the dim corridor. The chains wrapped around the door looked thick, industrial, like they could hold back a freight train. There was no way I was getting through them. I glanced around, desperate for another way out, but the hallway was a dead end. Just me, the chain door, and the guy with the axe getting closer with every step. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it was going to tear through my chest. My hands instinctively went to the knife strapped to my side, the one they'd given us in the duffel bags back in the first round. It felt ridiculously small compared to the axe, but it was all I had. My fingers tightened around the hilt as I forced myself to back away toward the door. The guy in the red circle mask stopped about 10 feet from me, tilting his head slightly, like he was studying me, calculating. Then, without a word, he raised the axe and started to charge. I didn't think. I just moved. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as the axe came down, embedding itself in the concrete floor with a deafening clang. I scrambled to my feet, gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. He pulled the axe free effortlessly, turning to face me again, his movements eerily calm. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking. It was a pathetic attempt to sound brave, and he didn't even flinch. He just started walking toward me again, dragging the axe behind him. The sound of metal scraping against concrete sent shivers down my spine. I had no choice. I lunged at him, slashing wildly with the knife. He dodged the first swing easily, but the second one caught him across the arm. It wasn't deep, just enough to tear the fabric of his sleeve, but it stopped him for a moment. He looked down at the cut, then back at me, tilting his head again. It was like he wasn't even angry. He was just curious. Then he swung the axe again. I ducked, feeling the blade whoosh over my head. It smashed into the wall behind me, sending chunks of concrete flying everywhere. I didn't wait for him to recover. I drove the knife into his leg, right above the knee, with all the strength I had. This time, he let out a low grunt of pain and staggered backward. I pulled the knife free and ran. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know where I was going. I just ran, turning corner after corner, praying I wouldn't end up in another dead end. The maze felt alive, shifting around me, the red emergency lights casting shadows that danced and twisted like they were mocking me. I could still hear his footsteps behind me, slower now, but steady, relentless. I turned a corner and found myself in another room. This one was different. The walls were lined with monitors, dozens of them, showing live feeds from cameras scattered throughout the maze. I could see the others, what was left of them, still wandering through the corridors. One guy was caught in some kind of trap, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, screaming for help that wasn't coming. Another girl was hiding behind a pile of debris, clutching her knife like it was a lifeline. And then I saw myself, on one of the screens, standing in the room, looking like a trapped animal. There was a single chair in the center of the room, facing the monitors. On the chair was a small tablet, its screen glowing faintly. I approached it cautiously, half expecting it to explode or trigger another trap. But when I picked it up, a message appeared on the screen. Congratulations, player number 7. You've reached the final round. What the hell? Final round? I didn't even know what the other rounds had been. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting, but before I could think too much about it, another message popped up. You now have 2 choices. 2 buttons appeared on the screen, each labeled with a single word: escape, end, escape. That's all I wanted. Without thinking, I reached for the button, but then I stopped. Something about it felt wrong, too easy. This whole night had been nothing but a nightmare, and now they were just letting me leave? No way. I stared at the screen, my hand hovering over the buttons, my mind racing. What did end mean? End the game? End me? Or was it something else entirely? My gut told me it wasn't that simple. Nothing about this had been simple. Behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy. The guy with the axe was getting closer. I didn't have time to think. I pressed end. The monitors flickered, and suddenly, all the live feeds went black. The room was plunged into silence, the hum of the maze's machinery gone. For a moment, I thought I'd made the wrong choice, that I'd just signed my own death warrant. But then, the wall in front of me slid open with a loud clank, revealing a narrow staircase leading upward. Without hesitating, I ran for it. The axe guy was almost at the doorway when I disappeared up the stairs, his heavy footsteps echoing behind me. I didn't look back. I just kept climbing, my legs screaming in protest, my lungs burning. The staircase spiraled upward endlessly, until finally, I burst through a door at the top. I was outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face. I was standing in a deserted parking lot, the warehouse looming behind me like some kind of concrete monster. The sky was still dark, the stars barely visible through the haze of city lights in the distance. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself that I was alive. That's when I noticed the car. It was parked at the edge of the lot, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. The engine was running, the headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver's side window rolled down, and I saw him, the guy in the white mask, sitting behind the wheel, watching me. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just sat there, his featureless face staring at me, like he was waiting for something. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to ask why they'd done this, but my body wouldn't cooperate. All I could do was stand there, trembling. Then, without a word, he rolled up the window and drove away. I don't know how long I stood there before my legs finally gave out and I collapsed onto the pavement. I don't know how I got home. The next thing I remember is waking up in my bed, still wearing the blood-stained jumpsuit, the knife still clutched in my hand. There was no news about the warehouse, no missing person reports. It was like none of it had ever happened. But when I checked my email, there was a single new message in my inbox, sent from an untraceable address. Congratulations, player number 7. Your prize has been deposited. Attached was a screenshot of a bank account. My bank account. The balance read $100,000. I don't know who they are or what they want, but I know one thing. I wasn't the only one they did this to, and I won't be the last. If you ever see an ad for a game like this, no matter how tempting it seems, don't do it. Don't even think about it, because the real prize isn't the money, it's surviving. I was invited to a secret Illuminati Christmas party through a dark web link. The guests weren't human. Alright, let me preface this by saying I'm not the kind of person who believes in conspiracy theories or creepy internet urban legends. Seriously, I'm just a regular dude. I work a boring 9 to 5 at an IT help desk. I watch Netflix to unwind and occasionally doom scroll Reddit when I'm bored. Nothing extraordinary about me. But what happened to me last December? I can't explain it. I can barely sleep anymore because of it. I guess I'm sharing this because maybe someone out there knows what the hell happened to me. Or maybe I just need to get it off my chest. Either way, buckle up, because this is going to sound insane. It started late one night, about 2 weeks before Christmas. I was home alone in my crappy one-bedroom apartment, eating cold pizza and scrolling Reddit like usual. I was going through the r/NNOSLEEP subreddit because, yeah, I like freaking myself out sometimes. You know, reading those creepy "my neighbor isn't human" stories, or "I found a cursed doll at a flea market" kind of stuff. Fun to read, but obviously fake, right? But that night, I stumbled on a post titled, "The Dark Web's Holiday Special." I wish I could remember the username of the person who posted it, but it was something generic like Holiday Horror 86 or something. The post itself was short, just one sentence. You haven't celebrated Christmas until you've been invited to the Winter Solstice Gala. Link removed. Below the post, there were a bunch of comments. Some people were making jokes, like, "Lamau, is this an Illuminati thing? Bet Jeff Bezos is hosting." But there were others that weren't joking. Comments like, "Don't click it. Just don't. They don't invite you unless they already know everything about you." Of course, the link in the post had been removed by Reddit mods, but someone in the comments had reposted it. It wasn't a normal link. It looked like a bunch of random letters and numbers, the kind of thing you'd only see on the dark web. Next to the link, the commenter wrote, "If you're stupid enough to click this, you'll wish you hadn't. You can't unsee what's waiting for you." At this point, I should have just scrolled on. I know that. Every part of me was screaming, "This is a bad idea. This is exactly how people end up on Dateline NBC." But curiosity got the better of me. Here's the thing. I'm not some tech genius, but I know my way around a computer. I figured I could click the link, poke around for a minute, and if it was something sketchy, I'd just close it and clear my browser history. No harm done, right? So I copied the link and pasted it into my Tor browser. For those who don't know, Tor is like the gateway to the dark web. It's not illegal or anything, but it's where all the weird, creepy corners of the internet live. I told myself I was just being adventurous, just checking it out. What's the worst that could happen? When I hit enter, my screen went black for a second, and I thought my computer had crashed. But then, slowly, a website started to load. It wasn't anything flashy, just a plain black background with white text in this weird, elegant font. It said, "Congratulations, you have been chosen." Beneath the text, there was a single countdown timer. It was set for 72 hours, and under that, there was a button that said, "Accept your invitation." I stared at it for a long time. At first, I thought it was just some kind of prank, maybe an edgy internet game or an elaborate viral marketing stunt. But there was something off about it. Like the way the site loaded, it didn't feel fake. It felt personal, like it wasn't just some random link. It was meant for me. I was about to close the browser when something weird happened. My Spotify, which had been playing a random lo-fi playlist in the background, suddenly cut out. And then, through my laptop speakers, I heard a voice. I swear I'm not making this up. A deep, distorted voice said, "You've been chosen. Don't ignore this." At that moment, I slammed my laptop shut like an idiot. My heart was racing, and I was trying to convince myself that what I'd heard was just a glitch, some audio file embedded in the website or something, but it felt wrong, like someone was watching me. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I went to work and tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just a weird internet stunt, and I was being paranoid. But when I got home that evening, there was an envelope waiting for me on my doorstep. Now, this is where things get really messed up. The envelope was pitch black, sealed with this strange red wax stamp. It had no address, no postage, just my name, written on the front in silver ink. My full name, not the shortened version I use on social media. My real name. I brought it inside and opened it. Inside was a single card, black with silver lettering. It read, "You are cordially invited to the Winter Solstice Gala. Attendance is mandatory." There was no date, no location, nothing else. Just those 4 words. Attendance is mandatory. I sat there staring at it, my hands shaking. I tried to tell myself it was just a prank, but how did they know my name? How did they know where I lived? I'd never given my address to anyone online, let alone on the dark web. Over the next few days, things got worse. My phone started glitching out randomly, even when it was off. I'd get these weird notifications from apps I didn't even use, like Snapchat messages from accounts that didn't exist. My Alexa started acting weird too. I'd ask it to play music, and instead, it would say things like, "The gala awaits." I unplugged it, but it didn't help. I felt like I was being watched. Every time I looked out my window, I swore I saw shadows moving across the street, but when I went to check, there was no one there. By the time the countdown on the website hit 0, I was completely on edge. I hadn't told anyone what was happening because, honestly, who would believe me? I was starting to think I'd just imagined the whole thing. But then, at exactly 3:33 p.m., on the day the timer ended, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, no one was there. Just a sleek black car idling at the curb. The driver's window rolled down, and a man in a black suit leaned out. He didn't say a word. He just nodded toward the back seat, like he was waiting for me to get in. I should have slammed the door and called the police, but instead, I just stood there, frozen, because in his hand, the man was holding the black envelope. And this time, my name wasn't on it. It just said, "You shouldn't have clicked the link." I stood there in the doorway, staring at the black envelope in the man's hand. My mind was racing. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to slam the door, to lock it, and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't move. It was like my feet were glued to the ground, like the envelope itself had some kind of hold over me. The man in the suit didn't say anything. He didn't gesture for me to come closer. He just sat there, staring at me through dark sunglasses, holding the envelope like he knew I'd come for it eventually. The car was sleek, black, and shiny, like something out of a high-budget movie. No plates, no logos, just an empty menace parked right outside my building. Even the air around it felt wrong, like the sound of the city had been swallowed up the second it arrived. When I finally got the courage to look at his face properly, I noticed something weird. It wasn't the sunglasses or the way he didn't blink. It was his skin, It was too smooth, too polished, like a mannequin or one of those CGI characters that almost looks real, but not quite. Every second I stared at him, I got more convinced that something about him wasn't human. I wanted to ask who he was, what he wanted, but my throat felt tight. The words just wouldn't come out. Before I could do anything, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a second envelope. He held it out the window, waiting for me to take it. And like an idiot, I did. I don't know what I was expecting when I opened it. Maybe another cryptic invitation or some kind of threat. But this time, the card inside was different. It was a small, glossy piece of paper, an invitation, but not like the handwritten one I'd received before. This one looked more official. It had a logo on the top, a black triangle with an eye in the center, surrounded by intricate golden designs. Beneath it, in embossed lettering, were the words, "Winter Solstice Gala, your presence has been confirmed." Underneath that, there was a time and date, December 21st, 8 p.m. And finally, the location. Pickup point, classified. Your driver will take you there. That was it. No instructions, no clues. Just a reminder that I was already too far in to back out. Before I could process what was happening, the man in the car rolled up his window and motioned for me to get in the back seat. It wasn't a request. It was an order. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was just the sense that there was no point in running anymore. Whatever the reason, I found myself stepping off the curb and sliding into the back seat of the car, feeling the cold leather beneath me as the door clicked shut. The ride was unsettling. The driver never said a word. He just stared straight ahead, his hands perfectly still on the wheel, like he wasn't even breathing. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see out of them, and my phone had no signal. Every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, I caught the faintest glimpse of the driver's face, and it made my stomach twist. There was something wrong with his jaw. It didn't move naturally. It was stiff, like his face wasn't really his, like it was a mask. The car drove for what felt like hours. I had no idea where we were going. The city lights disappeared pretty quickly, and soon we were on an empty road surrounded by trees. I tried asking the driver where we were headed, but he didn't respond. He didn't even flinch. The silence was suffocating. At one point, I noticed something strange. The temperature inside the car was dropping, fast. I could see my breath fogging up in front of me, and when I touched the door handle, it felt like ice. I started to panic, banging on the window and yelling for the driver to stop, but it was like I wasn't even there. I tried opening the door, but it wouldn't budge. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the car stopped. We were in the middle of nowhere. A dense forest surrounded us, the kind you only see in movies about people who get lost and never come back. The moon was full, but it barely lit the clearing where we'd parked. I could make out the faint outline of a path leading into the woods, but beyond that, it was pitch black. The driver got out of the car without saying a word. He opened my door and gestured for me to follow him. His movements were mechanical, like a robot trying to mimic human behavior. I wanted to run, to get back in the car and drive myself home, but something about the way he looked at me, I knew he wouldn't let me. I stepped out into the cold, my breath fogging up in the icy air. The driver pointed toward the path, and as soon as I started walking, he got back in the car and drove off. Just like that. No explanation, no instructions. Just me, alone in the middle of the woods. The path was narrow and uneven, barely visible under the moonlight. Every step I took, I felt like something was watching me. The trees were so tall and close together that they blocked out almost all the light, and the farther I walked, the quieter it got. No wind, no animals, nothing. Just the sound of my footsteps crunching on frozen leaves. Eventually, the path opened up into a clearing, and that's when I saw it. A massive mansion stood in the middle of the woods, its windows glowing with a warm golden light. It looked old, Victorian maybe, but there wasn't a single sign of wear or decay. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the hedges trimmed into strange geometric shapes. At the center of the driveway was a fountain, but instead of water, it looked like it was filled with something dark, black liquid, thick and shiny, like oil. I was so focused on the house that I didn't notice the figures standing by the front door until I was almost on top of them. They weren't human. There were 3 of them, dressed in long black cloaks with hoods that covered their faces. Their hands were pale, too pale, like they'd been drained of all blood, and their fingers were long and thin, ending in sharp black nails. One of them turned toward me, and I swear I saw something move under their hood. Not a face, something else. Before I could turn and run, one of them stepped forward and held out their hand. In it was another envelope, black, with the same red wax seal as before. They didn't say anything. They didn't move, didn't breathe. They just stood there, waiting for me to take it. I don't know why I did it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. When I broke the seal and pulled out the card inside, I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't an invitation this time. It was a list of names. My name was at the top. Beneath it were 4 other names. I didn't recognize any of them, but as I stared at the card, I realized something horrible. The list wasn't random. It was an order, a sequence. The figure nearest to me tilted their head as if they were waiting for me to understand. And that's when I saw it. There was blood dripping from their hands, slowly, steadily, pooling on the ground at their feet. Whatever this gala was, it wasn't a party. It was a ritual. And I was next. I stood there in the clearing, clutching the card with my name at the top of the list, and I could feel the world closing in around me. My chest tightened as my brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It wasn't just fear. It was like some invisible force was pinning me to the spot, forcing me to stand there under the gaze of those hooded figures, or whatever they were. The card felt heavy in my hand, almost like it was burning me. My name, written in that same elegant cursive font, stared back at me. Underneath it, in descending order, were 4 other names. Names of people I'd never heard of. Amelia Roth, David Stokes, Marta Salinas, and Ricky Bellamy. The names meant nothing to me, but the implications. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was some kind of hit list. And I was at the top. One of the cloaked figures moved closer, their hands still dripping with blood. The smell hit me then, coppery, metallic, like pennies soaked in water. It was coming off them in waves, and it was so strong I gagged. The figure stopped a few feet in front of me, close enough for me to hear the faint, wet sound of something shifting beneath their hood. And then they spoke. Or, more accurately, it spoke. The voice wasn't human. It was layered, like multiple voices speaking at once, deep and guttural and echoing in ways that shouldn't have been possible. "Your place has been prepared," it said. Before I could process what that even meant, the figure turned, and motioned toward the mansion. The doors creaked open slowly, spilling golden light into the clearing, and I could see shadowy figures moving inside. Lots of them. I didn't want to go in. Every fiber of my being told me that stepping inside that house would be the last thing I ever did. But the moment the doors opened, the other two cloaked figures stepped behind me. They didn't touch me, but I felt them there, close enough that I could hear their shallow, unnatural breathing. It was clear. I didn't have a choice. The inside of the mansion was even more surreal than the outside. The air felt wrong, too warm, too still, like the entire place was alive and watching me. The walls were lined with mirrors, but the reflections didn't match the room. I'd glance at one and see myself standing there, but in the reflection, the hallway behind me would be empty, even though the cloaked figures were still following me. Another mirror showed my reflection, but I was smiling. I wasn't smiling in real life. The entryway opened into a massive ballroom, and that's when I saw them. The guests. There were dozens of people, all dressed in expensive formal clothing, tuxedos, ball gowns, jewelry that looked like it cost more than my apartment. At first glance, they looked like regular people, but the longer I watched them, the more I realized something was off. Their movements weren't right. It was like they were mimicking how humans are supposed to act, but not quite getting it. Some of them moved too stiffly, like marionettes on strings. Others moved too fluidly, their limbs bending in ways that made my stomach churn. A woman in a red dress turned toward me, and I swear her neck stretched just a little too far, like a snake uncoiling. And their faces, God, their faces, they were perfect, too perfect, symmetrical to the point of being unnatural. Their eyes were glassy, their skin smooth like porcelain, and their mouths stretched into wide, unsettling smiles that never faded. When they talked to each other, it was in hushed tones, but their mouths didn't move the way they should have. Sometimes, they didn't move at all. I stood frozen at the edge of the ballroom, trying not to throw up, when I noticed something else. Every single guest was wearing a mask. Not the kind you'd see at a masquerade ball, though. These masks were disturbing. Animal faces twisted into grotesque shapes. A fox with too many eyes. A deer with antlers that spiraled like corkscrews. A wolf with jagged, razor-sharp teeth that looked too real. One of them, a man in a sleek black suit, turned toward me. His mask was a goat's face, its eyes hollow and its mouth locked in a wide, predatory grin. He tilted his head slightly, as if sizing me up, and then raised a champagne glass in my direction. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth and dripping with malice. "We've been waiting for you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was dry, and my heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. Before I could move, one of the cloaked figures behind me grabbed my shoulder, not roughly, but firmly enough that I knew I wasn't going anywhere. They guided me toward the center of the room, where a massive dining table had been set up. The table was covered in food, but none of it looked edible. There were platters of raw meat, bloody and unrecognizable, alongside bowls of something black and oily that smelled rancid. A roast pig sat in the center, but its eyes were still open, and I could have sworn I saw its chest rise and fall, like it was still breathing. The guests didn't seem to notice or care. They were helping themselves to the feast, tearing into the meat with their bare hands and drinking the black liquid from crystal goblets. It didn't even look like they were eating. It was more like they were feeding, their mouths stretching unnaturally wide as they devoured the grotesque spread. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn and run and never look back. But then the goat-masked man clinked his glass with a knife, and the room went silent. Every single guest turned to look at me, their glassy eyes unblinking, their twisted smiles frozen in place. "Tonight," the goat-masked man said, stepping toward me, "we welcome a new participant to our sacred tradition, a night of giving, a night of sacrifice." The word sacrifice sent a jolt of terror through me. I tried to back away, but the cloaked figure behind me tightened their grip on my shoulder, holding me in place. The goat-masked man reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a knife. It wasn't just any knife. It was ornate, with a blade that gleamed like silver and a handle carved into the shape of a screaming face. He held it out to me, his smile widening beneath the mask. "You will begin," he said, "as is tradition." I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. But when I looked down at the card still clenched in my hand, the list of names came rushing back to me. My name: Amelia Roth, David Stokes, Marta Salinas, Ricky Bellamy. My stomach dropped as I realized what they were asking me to do. "No," I whispered. My voice cracked, barely audible, but the goat-masked man heard it. He tilted his head, amused, like a predator toying with its prey. "It's not a request," he said. "It's an honor." The room erupted into applause, the guests clapping and cheering, as if this was all part of some sick performance. And as the goat-masked man pressed the knife into my trembling hands, I realized the truth. I wasn't just a guest at this gala. I was the executioner. The knife felt cold and heavy in my hands. It wasn't like any knife I'd ever seen before. The blade shimmered in a way that made it seem alive, almost breathing, and the screaming face carved into the handle seemed to shift when I looked at it out of the corner of my eye. I wanted to drop it, to throw it as far away as possible, but my fingers wouldn't let go. They clung to it, like it had fused with my skin. The goat-masked man stepped back, folding his hands neatly in front of him. His hollow, black eyes bore into me from behind the mask. "You may begin with the first name," he said, his voice calm, almost fatherly. "Amelia Roth is waiting." My heart plummeted. The list, the names, they weren't just random. These were real people. Someone named Amelia Roth was here, somewhere in this house, and they expected me to... I couldn't even think the word. "No," I stammered. My voice cracked, and I could barely hear myself over the pounding in my ears. "I'm not doing this. You've got the wrong person." The goat-masked man tilted his head, his grin widening. "Do you really think you have a choice?" he asked, his tone still polite, but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut glass. "You clicked the link. You accepted the invitation. You walked through those doors. You've already begun." I looked around the room, desperate for help, but the guests were just watching me. Their glassy, unblinking eyes stared, their twisted smiles frozen in place, like they were mannequins waiting to be animated. The cloaked figures stood at the edges of the room, their blood-stained hands folded neatly in front of them, silent and unmoving. There was no way out. "If you won't begin," the goat-masked man said, stepping closer, "then you will be moved to the list." His voice was still calm, but the weight of those words hit me like a freight train. I tried to breathe, but my lungs felt like they were filled with concrete. The list. My name was already at the top. What would happen if I refused? I didn't want to know. I couldn't even let my mind go there. Who is she?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The goat-masked man's grin widened. He gestured toward the far corner of the room, where a door I hadn't noticed before stood slightly ajar. "She's waiting for you," he said. "The first offering is always the simplest. After all, you'll need to build your courage for the others." I didn't want to go. My legs felt like jelly as I stumbled toward the door, but something compelled me forward. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was that invisible force that seemed to control everything in this place. Whatever it was, I found myself standing in front of the door, my hand trembling as I pushed it open. The room on the other side was small and dimly lit, with no windows and no furniture except for a single wooden chair in the center. And sitting in that chair, bound at the wrists and ankles, was a woman. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with short brown hair and a face that was both ordinary and unforgettable at the same time. She wasn't crying or screaming. She just stared at the floor, her expression blank, like she'd already accepted whatever was about to happen. "Amelia Roth," I whispered, the name barely leaving my lips. It felt alien, foreign, like it didn't belong to the living, breathing person in front of me. Her head snapped up at the sound of her name, and when she looked at me, I saw the panic in her eyes. She was terrified, but not of me. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, they're lying to you. You don't have to." Before she could finish, one of the cloaked figures appeared in the doorway behind me. I hadn't heard them enter. They didn't make a sound, but I felt their presence, cold and suffocating. Without a word, they placed a hand on my shoulder, their touch like ice seeping into my skin. "Do it!" The goat-masked man's voice echoed from somewhere behind me, though I hadn't seen him follow me into the room. "Or you will take her place." I turned back to Amelia, my hand shaking so badly I thought I might drop the knife. "I don't want to do this," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't want to hurt you. I swear." "They don't care what you want," she interrupted, her voice sharp and desperate. "You're just a pawn to them. You think you'll survive this? You won't. None of us will." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what to do, what to say. I wanted to believe her, to believe that there was some way out of this. But the cloaked figure's hand tightened on my shoulder, and I knew the truth. There was no way out. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring at the knife in my hand. Time didn't feel real anymore. Seconds stretched into hours, and every breath felt like it might be my last. Amelia was still watching me, her eyes wide and pleading, but there was something else there too, a kind of resigned understanding. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Just do it. Better me than you." The words made my stomach churn. My vision blurred, and I felt like I might pass out. But my body moved on its own. My hand tightened around the knife, and I stepped closer to her. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just closed her eyes. And in that moment, I hated her for making it so easy. The knife sank into her chest with a sickening sound I'll never forget. It wasn't clean. It wasn't quick. Her body jerked against the chair, and for a second, I thought I'd done it wrong, that I'd missed something. Blood poured from the wound, hot and sticky, soaking into the wood below. Her eyes opened, wide and glossy, and her lips moved, but no sound came out. And then she went still. The silence that followed was unbearable. I dropped the knife and stumbled back, my hands covered in blood, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. My head was spinning, my vision darkening at the edges. I wanted to scream, to run, to wake up, and find out this was all some horrible dream, but the truth was staring me in the face. I'd killed her. The cloaked figure behind me stepped forward, picking up the knife and wiping it clean with a cloth they seemed to pull out of nowhere. They didn't say a word, but I could feel their satisfaction. The goat-masked man's voice echoed through the room again, though I still couldn't see him. "Well done," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You've taken your first step. Only 4 more to go. 4 more." My vision swam, and I felt my knees give out beneath me. As I crumpled to the floor, the last thing I saw was Amelia's lifeless body slumped in the chair, her blood pooling around her feet. And then the door opened again. I don't remember much after Amelia. I must have blacked out, or maybe my mind just couldn't process what I'd done. When I woke up, I was back in the ballroom. The air was heavy, with the sickly, sweet smell of decay, but the guests didn't seem to notice. They were laughing, sipping from their goblets, their glassy eyes flicking toward me every now and then, as if watching a particularly entertaining act in a play. My clothes were stiff with dried blood. It was all over my hands, under my nails, even smeared on my face. I wanted to claw it off, to scrub myself clean, but I couldn't move. The weight of what I'd done crushed me, pinned me to the floor. My stomach churned, and I thought I might throw up, but there was nothing left inside me to expel. Then I heard the voice. 1 down, 4 to go. The goat-masked man was standing over me, his hollow black eyes burning into mine. He held out the knife again, the blade gleaming as if it had been freshly polished. There wasn't a trace of blood on it, as if it hadn't just ended a life. "Stand up," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "It's time for the next offering." I don't know how I managed to get to my feet. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and my head was spinning so badly I could barely see straight. The goat-masked man handed me the knife, and this time I didn't resist. I didn't have the energy to fight. I just held it, the weight of it familiar now, almost comforting in a sick, twisted way. "David Stokes," he said, gesturing toward another door on the far side of the room. I didn't ask questions. I didn't hesitate. I just walked toward the door, my body moving on autopilot. The guests watched me as I passed, their smiles widening, their heads tilting at unnatural angles. I could feel their anticipation, their hunger, like they were feeding off my fear. The room beyond the door was identical to the first. Same dim lighting, same wooden chair in the center. But David was different. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and a face lined with worry. He wasn't tied up like Amelia had been. He was just sitting there, his hands resting on his knees, staring at me with tired, bloodshot eyes. "I get it," he said before I could say anything. His voice was steady, almost resigned. "They got to you too." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat felt like it was closing up, and my hands shook so badly I thought I might drop the knife. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Listen, kid," he said. "I've been in this place longer than you can imagine. I've seen what happens to people who try to fight back. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But whatever you do, don't let them take your soul." "What does that even mean?" I managed to choke out. My voice sounded foreign, like it didn't belong to me. David's eyes darkened. "You'll see," he said quietly. "When it's your turn, you'll see." I don't know how long it took me to do it. Minutes, hours. Time didn't feel real anymore. David didn't fight, just like Amelia hadn't. He just sat there, watching me, with those tired, knowing eyes. and when the knife finally pierced his chest, he let out a soft, shuddering breath and slumped forward. The sound of his heartbeat stopping was deafening. I stumbled back, dropping the knife, my vision blurring as bile rose in my throat. The cloaked figure appeared again, silently cleaning the blade, and the goat-masked man's voice echoed in my ears. 2 down, 3 to go. By the time I reached Marta Salinas, I wasn't even human anymore. I was a shell, a puppet, moving through the motions without thought or feeling. Marta was young, barely out of her 20s. She screamed when she saw me, begged me to let her go, but her cries fell on deaf ears. I didn't even hesitate. I did what they wanted me to do, and when it was over, I didn't feel a thing. The guests cheered louder after Marta. Their applause echoed in my skull, drowning out my thoughts, and for a moment, I thought I might lose myself entirely. But then I saw the list again, still clutched in my trembling hand, and my eyes landed on the last name, Ricky Bellamy. The door to Ricky's room was different. It wasn't plain like the others. It was ornate, carved with intricate designs that seemed to writhe and shift when I looked at them. The air around it was thick, almost suffocating, and I had to force myself to push it open. Inside, the room was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing, but I could hear breathing, deep, raspy, and uneven. I took a cautious step forward, and the door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Ricky." The breathing grew louder, closer, and then a low, guttural growl filled the room. My blood turned to ice as a pair of glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness, staring directly at me. "That's not Ricky," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The thing in the room, whatever it was, laughed. It was a horrible, wet sound, like bones snapping underwater. "You thought you were the hunter," it said, its voice deep and distorted. "But you've been the prey all along." I don't remember what happened next. The last thing I saw was the glowing red eyes lunging toward me, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was back in the ballroom, surrounded by the guests. But this time, something was different. They weren't watching me anymore. They were watching someone else. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and saw myself. I was standing in the center of the room, holding the knife, my face blank and lifeless. The goat-masked man stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, grinning wider than ever. "The ritual is complete," he said, his voice echoing in my ears. "Welcome to the family." I tried to scream, to move, to do anything, but I couldn't. My body was gone, my soul ripped from it, trapped in the endless void of those glassy, unblinking eyes. I was just another guest now, another twisted mask in the ballroom, watching as the next victim was brought in to take my place, and the knife was already in their hands. I bid on a rare NASA artifact from the dark web, the moon rock. They sent me. Hums at night, and something in my room hums back. All right, so before you start calling me an idiot, let me just say, I know. Messing around on the dark web is a dumb idea. Honestly, I don't even know what I was thinking. Well, scratch that. I know exactly what I was thinking. I was bored. Like, mind-numbingly bored. It was a Tuesday night, around 1:30 a.m., and I was in that dangerous state of sleep-deprived curiosity, where bad decisions seem like brilliant ideas. I was scrolling through Reddit, reading random conspiracy theories about NASA, Area 51, the usual rabbit hole of what-if scenarios. Somewhere in there, I stumbled on a thread talking about rare artifacts from space. People were claiming they'd seen actual moon rocks for sale, like real moon rocks. Now, I don't know if you're into space stuff, but I am. Ever since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with the moon. I even had those glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling when I was younger. So when I saw people talking about NASA artifacts being sold on the dark web, I figured, why not check it out? So I downloaded a Tor browser, hopped on, and started exploring. Most of what I found was garbage, sketchy listings for fake passports, counterfeit money, all the usual crap you'd expect. But then, about an hour into my search, I found it. A listing that sent chills down my spine in the best way possible. It was titled, Genuine NASA Moon Rock, Verified Origin, Limited Availability. The description was vague, but intriguing. It claimed the moon rock had been acquired through classified means, whatever that means, and came with documentation proving its authenticity. The pictures showed this small, dark gray rock in a glass display case with NASA's logo etched onto a plaque underneath. The starting bid was $200. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I placed a bid. I mean, I wasn't expecting to win or anything. I figured some rich collector would swoop in with a ridiculous offer, and that'd be the end of it. But nope. A few days later, I got an email saying my bid had won. That should have been my first red flag. Who sells a real moon rock for $200? But at the time, I was too excited to care. The email included a link to finalize payment, Bitcoin only, of course, and an address for shipping. Against my better judgment, I sent the payment and waited. 2 weeks later, the package arrived. The box was smaller than I expected, about the size of a shoebox. It was wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address, just a weird, smudged stamp that looked like it had been through customs somewhere in Eastern Europe. I brought it inside, set it on my desk, and stared at it for a while. I don't know why, but I felt uneasy. Like, deep down, I knew this was a bad idea. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a knife and carefully sliced through the tape. Inside, there was a black wooden box with a NASA logo carved into the top. It was weirdly heavy for its size, like it had been made out of solid steel or something. When I opened it, there it was, my moon rock. The rock itself was smaller than I thought it'd be, maybe the size of a golf ball, but it looked off. The pictures from the listing made it look like a regular gray rock, but in person, it had this strange, almost metallic sheen. It was mesmerizing. I picked it up and immediately regretted it. The surface was freezing cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer for hours. My fingers felt numb after just a few seconds of holding it. Still, I was thrilled. I mean, how many people can say they own a piece of the freaking moon? I put the rock back in its case, set it on my shelf, and posted about it on Instagram. Bad idea, I know. My caption was something dumb like, I own a moon rock now. Your move, Elon Musk. My friends thought it was a joke, but whatever. I knew it was real, and that's all that mattered. That night was when things started getting weird. I was lying in bed, scrolling through TikTok, when I noticed this faint humming noise. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe a car engine or something, but then I realized it was coming from my shelf, more specifically, from the moon rock. It was so quiet at first, I thought I was imagining it, but the longer I listened, the louder it got. It wasn't just a hum, it was rhythmic, almost like a pulse. I got out of bed, walked over to the shelf, and stared at the rock. The hum stopped the second I got close. I stood there for a solid minute, waiting for it to start again, but it didn't. Figuring I was just tired, I went back to bed and tried to sleep. But then, right as I was drifting off, the noise started again. Only this time, it wasn't just the rock. Something else in my room was humming back. At first, I thought it was my phone or maybe my laptop, but no. The sound was coming from my closet. It was faint, barely audible, but it matched the rhythm of the rock's hum perfectly, like they were communicating. I don't know how to describe the feeling I had in that moment, but it was like my body just froze. My brain was screaming at me to get up and check, but I couldn't move. I just lay there, staring at my closet door, too scared to even breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the hum stopped. The room went dead silent, and for a brief second, I thought it was over. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. The closet door was open, just a crack. I swear, I hadn't touched that door in weeks. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but when I woke up, I was still staring at the closet. The door was wide open. I don't mean open just a crack like it was before. I mean wide enough for someone or something to walk out of. And yet, there was nothing in there. Just my clothes, a few shoeboxes, and an old backpack I hadn't touched since high school. I tried telling myself it was the air conditioning or something that had made the door move, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I don't know why, but I had this overwhelming sense of being watched, like I wasn't alone in the room. Still, I brushed it off. I convinced myself I'd been overreacting, probably just psyching myself out because of the whole dark web thing. The moon rock was cool, yeah, but it wasn't worth losing sleep over. At least that's what I told myself. But the weirdness didn't stop. The next few days were a blur. I started hearing the hum at random times during the day, not just at night. It wasn't constant either. It would come and go, like whatever was causing it was deciding when to make itself known. I'd be sitting at my desk scrolling through Twitter, and suddenly I'd hear it. That low, rhythmic vibration coming from the rock. What really freaked me out, though, was how my phone started acting up. At first, it was just little things, like my apps crashing or my screen freezing, but then it got worse. One night, I opened TikTok, and instead of the usual dumb videos, my For You page was just static, pure, grainy, black and white static. No sound, no captions, just the same creepy noise you'd hear on an old TV when there's no signal. I tried refreshing the app, but it wouldn't go away. I even uninstalled and reinstalled it, but as soon as I opened it again, there it was. And then the static changed. It wasn't just random noise anymore. It was forming shapes, faces. I only caught a glimpse of it before I slammed my phone down on the desk. But I swear, one of the faces looked like me. Only wrong. Like a distorted, broken version of my face, with wide, blacked out eyes and a gaping mouth frozen in a silent scream. By this point, I was freaking out. I decided I was done with the rock. Whatever it was, wherever it came from, I didn't want it in my house anymore. I grabbed the display case off my shelf and carried it out to the trash, but as soon as I set it down, I felt sick. Like, physically sick. My head started pounding, my vision blurred, and my stomach churned like I was about to throw up. I stumbled back inside, barely making it to the bathroom before I collapsed onto the floor. When I looked in the mirror, my nose was bleeding. Not just a little trickle either, It was gushing like a faucet. I must have passed out after that, because the next thing I remember, I was waking up in my bed, the moon rock sitting right back on the shelf where I'd left it. That's when I knew I couldn't get rid of it. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going anywhere. But it wasn't just the rock anymore. Other things started happening around the house, things I couldn't explain. My kitchen cabinets would be open in the morning, even though I knew I'd closed them the night before. Lights would flicker whenever I walked into a room. My cat, Luna, started hissing at corners of the house for no reason, her fur standing on end like she could see something I couldn't. And then there were the scratches. I noticed the first one on my arm the morning after I tried to throw the rock away. It was shallow, almost like a paper cut, but I knew it hadn't been there before. By the end of the week, there were more, long, jagged scratches running up and down my arms and legs. I started wearing long sleeves to work just to keep people from asking questions. The worst part, though, was the dreams. Every night, I'd have the same nightmare. I'd be standing on the surface of the moon, completely alone, staring up at Earth. It should have been beautiful, but it wasn't. The Earth in my dream was wrong. The continents were distorted, twisted into shapes that looked like screaming faces. The oceans were pitch black, like ink. And then, just as I'd start to feel the hum vibrating through my chest, I'd see them. Figures, shadowy, human-like shapes standing in the distance, watching me. They never moved, never spoke, but I could feel them getting closer every time I had the dream. One night, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. That's when I saw it. The closet door was open again. This time, though, there was no mistaking it. There was something standing inside. It was too dark to see clearly, but I could make out the outline of a person, tall, unnaturally thin, with arms that seemed way too long for its body. It wasn't moving, just standing there, its head tilted slightly, like it was studying me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. All I could do was lie there, frozen in terror, as the humming started again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the rock. It was coming from the thing in my closet. And then it spoke. Not in words, exactly. It was more like a series of low, guttural noises, almost like the static I'd seen on my phone. But somehow, I understood it. It said one word over and over again, like a chant. Return. The next morning, I packed the rock back into its case and drove. I didn't even know where I was going, just anywhere but my house. I ended up at a Starbucks of all places, sitting in the corner with the case on the table in front of me, trying to figure out what the hell to do. I was scrolling through my emails, desperate to find some way to contact the seller, when I noticed something strange. One of the messages had no subject line, no sender, just a string of random numbers. I opened it, and all it said was, "You shouldn't have taken it. You've been marked." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I looked around the Starbucks, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the place was packed with regular people, sipping lattes and staring at their laptops. For a moment, I thought I was safe. Then my phone buzzed. It was another email, this time with a video attachment. I hesitated before opening it, but my curiosity got the better of me. The video was grainy, like it had been recorded on an old security camera, but I recognized the location immediately. It was my bedroom, and there, standing by the shelf where the moon rock used to be, was the figure from my closet. Only this time, it wasn't alone. There were others with it, dozens of them. If you've ever been so scared that your body goes cold, like ice in your veins cold, you'll know exactly how I felt when I saw that video. I replayed it at least 5 times, hoping, praying that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was real. It had to be. The timestamp on the footage was from the previous night, at exactly 3:13 a.m. That detail stuck with me. 3:13. I don't know why, but it felt significant, like there was some kind of meaning to it that I couldn't quite grasp. I wanted to tell myself it was just a coincidence, but deep down, I knew better. Nothing about this situation was a coincidence. I left the Starbucks in a panic, shoving the moon rock case into my backpack like I could somehow hide from whatever was happening. I got in my car and just started driving. No plan, no destination, just pure blind panic. I think I drove for hours, maybe longer. I wasn't even paying attention to where I was going. By the time I finally stopped, I was on some deserted stretch of highway, the sun just starting to set behind me. I pulled over to the side of the road and sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't want to look in the back seat. I couldn't look in the back seat. I had this horrible feeling that if I turned around, I wouldn't be alone. But of course, curiosity won out. Slowly, I turned my head, and nothing was there. Just my backpack sitting on the seat, the case poking out from the top. I let out a shaky breath, half laughing at myself for being so paranoid. But then I noticed something. The humming was back. It started soft, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing, but it was there. That same low, rhythmic vibration, like a pulse that wasn't mine. It wasn't coming from the rock, though. Not this time. It was coming from outside the car. I locked the doors immediately, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. The humming grew louder, deeper, like it was resonating inside my skull. I could feel it in my teeth, in my chest, like my whole body was vibrating. I scanned the area outside the car, but there was nothing. Just an empty stretch of road surrounded by trees. And then the headlights flickered. Not like they were shorting out or anything. They flickered in a deliberate pattern. On, off, like some kind of signal. The humming stopped for a split second, and in the silence, I heard something that made my stomach drop. Footsteps. They weren't loud, just a soft crunching of gravel that seemed to come from all directions at once. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew they were there. Watching, waiting. My hand hovered over the ignition, ready to gun it down the highway, but something stopped me. A figure stepped out of the tree line, barely illuminated by the fading light. It wasn't human. I mean, it had the shape of a person, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but that's where the similarities ended. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tightly over its bones, like it had been starved for decades. Its eyes were completely black, no whites, no pupils, just endless voids that seemed to swallow the light. And its mouth, God, its mouth. It was too wide, the corners stretching up into this grotesque grin filled with teeth that were sharp and jagged, like broken glass. It tilted its head at me, that same way the thing in my closet had, and raised one impossibly long arm to point directly at the car. At me. I don't remember starting the engine, but the next thing I knew, I was tearing down the highway at full speed. The thing didn't chase me, at least not that I could see, but the feeling of being watched never went away. It felt like there were eyes on me from every direction, even though the road was completely empty. I must have driven for miles before I finally saw a gas station. It was one of those small, sketchy ones in the middle of nowhere, with a flickering neon sign and a single pump that looked older than I was. I pulled in, more out of desperation than anything else, and stumbled out of the car. The attendant behind the counter was a grizzled old man who barely looked up from his newspaper as I walked in. I probably looked insane, sweaty, pale, trembling, but I didn't care. I just needed to be around another human being, someone who could tell me I wasn't losing my mind. "Hey," I said, my voice shaking. Have you seen anything weird around here?" He didn't respond at first, just kept reading his paper like I wasn't even there. I was about to ask again when he finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "You shouldn't have brought it here." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat tightening. He didn't look up, just gestured with one gnarled hand toward my car. "It's not yours. Never was. You need to put it back." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Put what back?" Now he looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. They were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost milky, like he was blind. But I could tell he wasn't. He saw me. He saw through me. "You know what?" he said. "Take it back to where it came from, before it's too late." I didn't ask any more questions. I couldn't. Something about the way he said it, so calm, so certain, made my chest tighten. I grabbed a bottle of water, paid in cash, and got the hell out of there. When I got back to the car, the humming was deafening. It was so loud now that I could barely think, like my skull was vibrating from the inside out. I climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, and that's when I saw it. The passenger seat wasn't empty anymore. The case was open. The moon rock was gone, and sitting in its place was something I'll never forget. A hand. Not a human hand, though. It was too big, too bony, with fingers that ended in sharp, claw-like points. It was covered in the same pale, translucent skin as the thing I'd seen on the highway. And it was twitching. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body just went numb as I stared at the hand, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Then, slowly, it started to move. The fingers flexed, curling into a fist, then splaying out again. It didn't look natural, like it was learning how to move for the first time. And then it reached for me. I slammed on the gas, swerving back onto the highway without even checking for oncoming traffic. My only thought was to get as far away as possible, but no matter how fast I went, the humming followed me. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was everywhere. In the engine, in the tires, in the very air around me. And then the headlights flickered again. This time, when they came back on, the road was filled with them. Dozens of figures, identical to the one I'd seen before, standing shoulder to shoulder, their black eyes reflecting the light like mirrors. I tried to brake, but the pedal wouldn't budge. The car kept accelerating, the speedometer climbing higher and higher as the figures grew closer. The last thing I remember is the sound of shattering glass. When I woke up, I was back in my room. The moon rock was sitting on the shelf, humming softly. The closet door was wide open, and I wasn't alone. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't move. I wasn't tied up or restrained. I just couldn't move. My body felt like it was frozen in place, locked in some invisible grip. My chest was tight, and every breath felt like I was trying to inhale through a straw. The humming was back, louder than ever, vibrating through every molecule of the air around me. The room was dark, but not pitch black. The faint glow of my alarm clock lit the edges of my bedroom, the corner of my desk, the outline of the shelf. And that's when I saw them. Not just one figure, not just two, but all of them. They were standing in my room, a half circle of those pale, elongated bodies, all with those bottomless black eyes staring down at me. And in the middle of the circle, cradled in a pair of skeletal hands, was the moon rock. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was full of cement. My mind was racing, flipping between terror and denial. This couldn't be happening. It shouldn't be happening. But it was. The figures didn't move, didn't blink, if they even had eyelids to blink with, but I could feel their gaze burrowing into me. It wasn't like being watched by a person. It was deeper than that. It felt like they were peeling me apart layer by layer, like they could see every thought, every memory, every secret I'd ever buried. And then one of them stepped forward. It moved slowly, deliberately, its bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. It was taller than the others, its limbs impossibly long, like it had been stretched out on some medieval torture rack. Its head was tilted, just like before, and its mouth hung open slightly, revealing teeth that looked more like shards of bone than anything functional. It knelt beside my bed, its face just inches from mine, and I could see every horrible detail. The thin, translucent skin stretched so tightly over its skull that I could see the veins pulsing beneath. The way its jaw seemed to twitch, like it was barely holding itself together. And those eyes, God, those eyes, they were like looking into a black hole, endless, empty, hungry. It raised one of its hands, the fingers curling unnaturally, and placed it on my chest. The second it touched me, the humming stopped. The silence was worse. The room felt suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of it. And then, in a voice that wasn't a voice, I heard it. Not with my ears, with my mind. The words crawled through my skull like spiders, sharp and cold and impossible to ignore. You took it. The words weren't accusatory. They were matter of fact, like it was stating some universal truth. I wanted to say something, to explain that I hadn't taken anything, that I'd just bought the stupid rock off the internet, but I couldn't. My lips wouldn't move. My tongue felt heavy and useless. All I could do was listen. It doesn't belong to you. It never did. The hand on my chest pressed down, and suddenly, I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, my lungs screamed for air, and I could feel my heartbeat pounding against its palm. For a moment, I thought this was it, that I was about to die in my own bed, surrounded by these things. But then it leaned in closer, its mouth opening wider, and I realized it wasn't killing me. Not yet. It was studying me. Its head jerked to the side, its neck cracking loudly, and it made this low, guttural sound that I can only describe as laughter. Not human laughter. There was no joy in it. It was a cold, mocking noise, like it was amused by my fear. And then, without warning, it pulled its hand away and stood up. The other figures stepped back, creating an opening in the circle. The one who had touched me turned and walked toward the moon rock, still cradled in those skeletal hands. It stopped in front of it, standing perfectly still, and then, for the first time, I saw it move with purpose. It raised both hands to its face and tore its own jaw off. The sound was wet and horrifying, like ripping apart a raw steak. The lower half of its face dangled by thin strands of flesh before dropping to the floor with a sickening thud. But it didn't stop there. The figure began to peel its skin away, stripping itself down layer by layer like it was shedding a costume. Beneath the pale skin was something far worse. Its body was covered in black, tar-like tendrils that writhed and twisted like they had a mind of their own. They pulsed and throbbed, dripping onto the floor and spreading outward like spilled oil. The other figures began to mimic it, tearing at their own flesh until the room was filled with these writhing, shapeless things. They no longer looked even remotely human, and that's when I realized they weren't just here for the rock. They were here for me. The tendrils began to spread across the floor, climbing up the walls and ceiling, filling the room with an inky blackness that seemed to devour the light. I could feel them creeping toward the bed, the mattress sinking slightly as they slithered over the edges, and then they touched me. It wasn't like being touched by something physical. It was cold, yes, but it was more than that. It was like they were inside me, crawling through my veins, wrapping around my bones. My mind was flooded with images, flashes of things I couldn't understand. Strange landscapes filled with impossible shapes, stars that burned too brightly, surrounded by swirling voids, and always that humming. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes? Hours? Time didn't feel real anymore. All I know is that when it stopped, I wasn't in my room anymore. I was standing on the moon. Not the moon from my dreams, though. This was different. The surface was jagged and uneven, the ground a deep, unnatural black that seemed to absorb all light. Above me, the earth hung in the sky, but it wasn't the earth I knew. It was twisted and broken, the continents bleeding into each other like ink spilled on paper. The oceans were gone, replaced by swirling voids of darkness, and I wasn't alone. The figures were there, standing in a circle around me. They weren't shedding their skins anymore. This was their true form. Black, writhing masses of tendrils, each one shifting and twisting like it was alive. In the center of the circle was the moon rock, floating above the ground and pulsing with a faint, eerie glow. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. All I could do was stand there as the circle tightened, the figures closing in on me. And then I heard it again, that voice in my head. "You have been marked." The tendril shot out, wrapping around my arms and legs, pulling me toward the rock. I fought as hard as I could, but it was useless. The closer I got, the louder the humming became, until it was all I could hear. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was inside me, vibrating through every cell in my body. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the earth. It wasn't twisted and broken anymore. It was gone. When I woke up, I was back in my room. My body felt heavy, like I'd been drugged, and every muscle ached like I'd run a marathon. The moon rock was gone. The figures were gone. But the humming was still there, faint but constant. And then I noticed the mirror. There was something written on it, scrawled in what looked like ash. "It's not over." When I saw those words smeared across my mirror, "It's not over," something in me snapped. Every fiber of my being screamed to get out of that house, to run and never look back. But where would I go? And even if I got away, I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever I had unleashed wasn't tied to my house. It wasn't tied to the moon rock. It was tied to me. I didn't want to touch my phone after what had happened, but I needed answers. I opened it reluctantly, half expecting to see static again, but my home screen looked normal. Still, it felt wrong, like the device wasn't really mine anymore. My apps all seemed fine until I opened Google. The search bar was blank, but there was something already written in the search history. "Where will you hide?" I dropped the phone, like it had burned me. My heart was racing, my skin clammy, but I couldn't stop. I picked it back up, scrolling furiously through my email for anything that could help me figure out who or what was behind this. That's when I saw it. A new email from the same cryptic address that had sent me the video of my room. No subject line, no text, just an attachment. It was another video. I hesitated. Every instinct I had was screaming not to open it, but I needed to know. I tapped it, and the screen filled with shaky, low-resolution footage. It was dark at first, the camera moving through what looked like a wooded area. The only light came from a faint, flickering glow in the distance. And then I recognized it. The glow wasn't from a flashlight or fire. It was from the moon rock. It was sitting on the ground in the middle of the woods, humming softly. The camera moved closer, the hum growing louder, until it stopped abruptly. The footage froze for a moment, and then the camera turned. The person holding it was now pointing it directly at me. Not a version of me, not a doppelganger. It was me, sitting in my bed, staring at my phone, right here, right now. The screen went black. I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud, the screen shattering into a web of cracks. But I didn't care. I couldn't deal with this. I needed to get out, anywhere but here. I grabbed my car keys, threw on a hoodie, and bolted out the front door without even locking it behind me. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just drove. It was the middle of the night. The road's empty, but I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see one of those things sitting in my back seat. I passed empty strip malls, gas stations, and fast food joints, all of them bathed in the cold glow of fluorescent lights. It felt like I was driving through a dead world. After what felt like hours, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart. It was the only place that seemed alive. The harsh, artificial brightness of the store cutting through the oppressive darkness outside. I parked in the far corner of the lot and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. For the first time in days, the humming was gone. The silence should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It was worse. I sat there for a long time, staring out the windshield, trying to convince myself this was all in my head. Maybe the rock wasn't real. Maybe the figures weren't real. Maybe I was just losing my mind. But then my car radio crackled to life. It wasn't tuned to a station. It was just static, harsh and grating, filling the car like an angry swarm of bees. I reached for the volume knob, but before I could touch it, the static stopped. And then I heard it. My own voice. "You can't run." I froze. The voice wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the car. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest. But the back seat was empty. The windows were fogging up now, the air inside the car growing thick and suffocating. My breath came in shallow gasps as I fumbled with the door handle, throwing it open and stumbling out into the parking lot. That's when I saw them. They were standing at the edge of the lot, just beyond the glow of the parking lights. A row of dark, distorted figures, their black eyes reflecting the pearl light like the surface of a still pond. There must have been a dozen of them, maybe more, and they were all staring directly at me. I backed away, my legs shaking so badly I thought they'd give out. I wanted to run, but where could I go? They were everywhere. My hands were trembling as I reached for my phone. God knows why. Maybe to call the police, maybe to record what was happening. But when I pulled it out, the screen lit up with a message. "Don't look away." I glanced back at the figures, and to my horror, they had moved. They were closer now, no longer at the edge of the lot, but halfway across it, their movements impossibly fast and jerky, like a video skipping frames. The humming was back, louder than ever, vibrating through the pavement, through my bones, through my soul. I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I was inside the Walmart. The fluorescent lights felt like salvation. The dull hum of the building's HVAC system grounding me in some semblance of reality. I leaned against a shelf of discounted Halloween decorations, trying to catch my breath, when I noticed something strange. The store was empty. Not just empty of customers, empty of everything. The shelves were bare, the aisles eerily clean, like the store had been abandoned years ago. The only thing left was the faint, flickering glow of the moon rock, sitting on the floor in the middle of the toy aisle. I don't know how it got there. I don't even know how I got there. One moment, I was by the Halloween aisle, and the next, I was standing in front of the rock, my feet moving on their own, like I was being pulled toward it. The humming grew louder, deafening now, and I felt something shift behind me. I turned slowly, and there they were, the figures, standing in a circle around me, just like they had in my room. Only this time, they weren't alone. There was another figure in the circle, a new one, smaller, familiar. It was me. I couldn't think, couldn't process what I was seeing. The figure was identical to me in every way, down to the clothes I was wearing. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but I could feel its eyes on me, those same black voids that had stared into me before. And then it spoke. "You can't undo this." Its voice was mine, but warped and distorted, like it was coming from a cracked speaker. It raised one of its hands, pointing to the moon rock, and as I looked down at it, I realized it wasn't glowing anymore. It was pulsing. Each pulse sent a wave of heat through the air, growing stronger and stronger, until I thought I was going to burn alive. The last thing I remember is the rock shattering, the sound like 1,000 screams compressed into a single moment. And then there was nothing. I woke up in my bed again, but this time I knew something was different. The moon rock was gone. The figures were gone, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Whatever I had brought into my life, whatever had marked me, it wasn't tied to the rock. It was tied to me. And now it was inside me, crawling beneath my skin, whispering in my mind. The humming hasn't stopped since. It's quieter now, but it's always there, like a constant reminder that I'll never be free. I don't know how long I have, but I know it's only a matter of time before they come back, because they didn't just take the moon rock. They took me.